Hi there and welcome. Jonathan here. These talks are offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to these practices. Your support makes a big difference. If you feel inspired to make a donation, please go to jonathanfoust.com. Thank you. Last week I talked about the practice of compassion in the inner life, of how compassion is really kind of the lubrication that allows you to really be with and to let go of what's between you and feeling happy. And tonight I'd like to talk about compassion in the outer life, how you can practice, as you practice compassion, both internally and externally, how powerful it can be. And I'd like to start off with a rather long story, but it's a good one. It's one of my favorites. And you might even like to have your eyes closed, if you like. One act of kindness that befell British writer Bernard Hare in 1982 changed him profoundly. Then, a student living just north of London, he tells the story to inspire troubled young people to help deal with their disrupted lives. The police called at my student hovel early evening, but I didn't answer as I thought they'd come to evict me. I hadn't paid my rent in months. But then I got to thinking, my mom hadn't been too good, and what if it was something about her? We had no phone in the hovel, and mobiles hadn't been invented yet, so I had to nip down to the phone box. I rang home to Leeds to find my mother was in hospital and not expected to survive the night. "Get home, son," my dad said. I got to the railway station to find I'd missed the last train. A train was going as far as Peterborough, but I would miss the connecting Leeds train by 20 minutes. To this day, I won't hear a bad word said about British Rail. I bought a ticket home and got on anyway. I was a struggling student and didn't have the money for a taxi the whole way, but I had a screwdriver in my pocket and my bunch of skeleton keys. I was so desperate to get home that I planned to nick a car in Peterborough, hitchhike, steal some money, something, anything. I just knew from my dad's tone of voice that my mother was going to die that night, and I intended to get home if it killed me. "Tickets, please," I heard as I stared blankly out of the window at the passing darkness. I fumbled for my ticket and I gave it to the guard when he approached. He stamped it, but then just stood there looking at me. I'd been crying, had red eyes, and must have looked a fright. "You okay?" he asked. "Of course I'm okay," I said. "Why wouldn't I be? And what's it got to do with you in any case?" "Well, you look awful," he said. "Is there anything I can do?" "You could get lost and mind your own business," I said. "That'd be a big help." I wasn't in the mood for talking. He was only a little bloke, and he must have read the danger signals in my body language and tone of voice. But he sat down opposite me anyway and continued to engage me. "If there's a problem, I'm here to help. That's what I'm paid for." I was a big bloke in my prime, so I thought for a second about physically sending him on his way, but somehow it didn't seem appropriate. He wasn't really doing much wrong. I was going through all the stages of grief at once: denial, anger, guilt, withdrawal, everything but acceptance. I was a bubbling cauldron of emotion, and he had placed himself in my line of fire. The only other thing I could think of to get rid of him was to tell him my story. Look, my mom's in the hospital. She's dying and she won't survive the night. I'm going to miss the connection to Leeds at Peterborough, and I'm not sure how I'm going to get home. It's tonight or never. I won't get another chance. I'm a bit upset. I don't feel like talking. I'd be grateful if you leave me alone, okay? Okay, he said, finally getting up. Sorry to hear that, son. I'll leave you alone then. Hope you make it home in time. Then he wandered off down the carriage back the way he came. I continued to look out of the window at the dark. 10 minutes later, he was back at my side of the table. Oh no, I thought, here we go again. This time, I'm really going to rag him down the train. He touched my arm. Listen, when we get to Peterborough, shoot straight over to platform 1 as quick as you like. The Leeds train will be there. I looked at him dumbfounded. It wasn't really registering. Come again, I said stupidly. What do you mean? Is it late or something? No, it isn't late, he said defensively, as if he really cared whether trains were late or not. No, I've just radioed Peterborough. They're going to hold the train up for you. As soon as you get on it, it goes. Everyone will be complaining about how late it is, but let's not worry about that on this occasion. You'll get home, and the main thing is that you'll get there. Good luck and God bless. Then he was off down the train again. Tickets, please? Any tickets now? I suddenly realized what a top-class, fully fledged jerk I was, and I chased him down the train. I wanted to give him all the money from my wallet, my driver's license, my keys, but I knew he would be offended. I caught him up and grabbed his arm. I just wanted to, I was suddenly speechless. I wish I had some way to thank you, I said. I appreciate what you've done. Not a problem, he said. If you feel the need to thank me, the next time you see someone in trouble, you help them out. That will pay me back amply. Tell them to pay you back the same way, and soon the world will be a better place. I was at my mother's side when she died in the early hours of the morning. Even now, I can't think of her without remembering the good conductor on that late-night train to Peterborough, and to this day, I won't hear a bad word said about British Rail. My meeting with the good conductor changed me from a selfish, potentially violent hedonist into a decent human being. But it took time. I've paid him back 1,000 times since then, I tell young people I work with, and I'll keep on doing so till the day I die. You don't owe me nothing at all. And if you think you do, I give you the same advice the good conductor gave me. Pass it down the line. So I'm kind of proud of myself for only getting as choked up as I did in reading that. I often... There's something so powerful about stories of people caring for each other. And I think it's a great topic before we head into the holidays. How do we bring compassion to the outer life and to our relationships? And so I'd like to touch on 4 hows in this little remaining time we have. First, how inner awareness leads you to outer awareness. How the doorway to compassion is through cultivating empathy. How to sensitize and train yourself to really see the suffering in others. And how to convert compassion into skillful action. So a good while back, I had a private session with a young person. And she had lots of issues in her life and kind of struggling in high school. And I oftentimes speak of a practice that I oftentimes do. It's called clearing the space, where you ask yourself, what's between me and feeling happy? And you just name what's there and you put it to the side and you ask again and you continue to ask, and it gives you this landscape of what's between you and feeling happy. And I knew that she had relationship issues, she had parental issues, she had behavioral issues, lots of stuff going on in her life. And I asked her if she would be willing to do this exercise. She said she was. And the first thing she named of what's between you and feeling happy was that she had acne. I had acne. I think many of us had acne. Anyone who's had acne knows how horrible it is when you're a teenager, when it's so important about mixing in and being accepted and so forth. And we just sort of paused there because I got what a big issue it was for her, what suffering she was experiencing just socially and in her life. And I just said, that stinks. I'm so sorry. And then I talked a little bit about my experience, sort of my self-consciousness and my shame. And somehow I think she got it. She got that I got it, which opened up a whole new level of our exploration. It's when we can see the suffering of others and empathize and feel it, we create a much deeper connection. And when I reflect back on the struggles in my life, and whenever I hear of someone who is a dog who's dying, I know what that's like. I've been through that a number of times, or with dying parents, or a stillborn child, someone who's going through a relationship breakup. I can relate. I've been there. Someone who's over 6'5" with 37-inch sleeves and size 15 shoes and has to special order everything. I know what that's like. I just have a good friend who's actually an inch taller than me, and he was down for a visit a few weeks ago, and for the first time in my life, I was able to give someone clothes. I was ecstatic. It was so cool. I could hand them to them and they fit. So when you think of your times of greatest struggle, and maybe you've had this experience where you've met someone who's in the midst of something you have gone through. Have you ever had that experience? And you know what it's like. You know pretty closely, if not exactly, what their experience is. There's a quickening in the heart that happens. It's that quivering of compassion that we feel for others. So as you are more self-aware of your own suffering, you are more aware of the suffering in others, and the more you can resonate and empathize, and the more present you can be for those in your life. And ultimately, any mindfulness practice, and again, I struggle with the word mindfulness, and I often say any non-judging practice that you engage into is all about remembering four things. It's remembering that stress and suffering happens to everyone, that there's a cause of stress and suffering, that it's possible to let go of your stress and suffering, and that there's a path. There are technologies and techniques that allow you to do that. And there's something about the more we can come into our own compassionate understanding of our own life struggles, that we realize that our suffering is not unique. That this is a shared experience, or as Werner Erhard said, 5 billion people thinking they're unique is not unique. And there's something so powerful about recognizing the interconnectivity that we all have. I'm heading out for our IMCW New Year's retreat next week, and it's over 100 people, all in silence for 5 days. And it becomes so clear that we're all in this together. And as we just have this collective here, just recognizing that there's so much we have in common. And it's really around these 4 truths of the fact of suffering, the cause, the cessation, and then the path. So how do we cultivate that sense of connectivity among ourselves? And the real teaching is around the development of empathy. You can actually train yourself to be more sensitive to other people's experience. I remembered something, and I actually dated it. It's horrifying that this was 35 years ago, because it feels like it was about 2 weeks ago. But I was, after the Peace Corps, I was cycling in Europe, and I was in Zurich, and I saw this street performer. I had never seen this before, but I imagine that you probably have. Have you ever seen the street performers who will mimic someone's walk? They walk behind them exactly as they walk. You know, when the person stops, they stop and they look around. And what's so cool is they just start off, and a few people will notice. And then when a few more people notice, then there are like 100 people watching this guy just walking up and down the street, mimicking folks. It's one of the most alive memories I have. I thought, well, I wonder if that would be a fun thing to do. Have you ever walked behind someone and mimicked how they walk? If you haven't done it, try it sometime. I mean, don't get too extreme. But it's really interesting. And I don't remember to do it that often, but sometimes if I see someone walking, I just happen to be walking behind them, I'll take on their body language. And it's stunning how much you can really get a sense of what it's like in that person's body just by mimicking how they walk. You can feel where their holding is, where their armoring is, their self-protection, or maybe even their joy. But by mimicking them, it's really quite stunning. Maybe when we have tea and cookies, you can try it out there. So if you like, you can close your eyes for a moment. Short little reflection here. You might bring into mind someone in your life now who you know is struggling or challenged. And as you think of this person, what do you imagine their day is like? What do you imagine they're feeling? And you might even imagine, if you could imagine being in their body, what impressions do you get if you were to breathe like they breathe? And just allow yourself to open up the mirror neurons just to imagine what they're feeling. And you might just simply say, I feel the suffering. I care about the suffering. And just track what that feels like inside. And then if you like, you can deepen the breath. And if you like, you can let your eyes open or feel free to remain with them closed. It's interesting how when you really notice non-judging awareness moment by moment by moment, how you're feeling things all the time. You know, someone gets on the elevator, you have a feeling. You know, there's a sound outside, you have a feeling. And so does everyone else. Everyone else is constantly reacting to their environment. And one of the beautiful things about really cultivating this non-judging moment-to-moment awareness is you can really begin to tune in to your perception of what's called Vedana. And Vedana is the felt sense reaction to what's happening. Something happens, then it registers in your body, and it registers as unpleasant or pleasant or neutral. Nowhere else it can go. And when you really slow down, you can really begin to notice the stimulus response. And it just happens automatically. Something happens, it's either going to register as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, somewhere in between. And so you get more and more sensitized. And you get more and more aware of all of your reactive patterns to life. And there's good news and bad news about that. You know, you get more sensitive, that's good, but you get more sensitive, and that's a challenge sometimes. It is not uncommon. In fact, a byproduct of a mindfulness practice is sensitivity to others. As you become more self-aware, you automatically become more aware of how others are feeling. And that can be a real blessing, and it can be a challenge sometimes, because there is something called compassion fatigue, when you can just be too sensitive and you need to back off. You need to self-protect in some way. It's very easy to get super sensitized. But what it helps us to really begin to recognize is how we all have this common human experience. And as the teachings say, it's about training yourself. It's not even training yourself. It can be almost effortless when you're in a place of open awareness where you see others in yourself and you see yourself in others. So you see someone on the highway who's acting like a jerk, and there's a recognition of, yeah, I've done that too. When you see someone who's suffering, it's like, I've been there too. And conversely, you can see someone who's experiencing joy. That too, I've been there too. And along with the recognition of what people are feeling, you begin to sink under that, into the underbelly, to be able to recognize what others are needing. Just as you become more aware of your own unmet needs, you can become more aware of the unmet needs of those around you. And that's where compassion begins to move into relationship. It begins to move into skillful action. And it can be a very interesting thing to explore, particularly for many of us who are going to be in all kinds of social configurations over the holidays, where inevitably things can get a little funky, you know. It's just to sense the unmet needs of the people you're hanging out with. Just asking that question can be very, very helpful. What is this person needing right now that they're not getting? And that could be an incredible bridge to bridge your heart to another. And again, part of the practice of compassion is training yourself to feel what other people are feeling, which is part of the unmet need. But it also opens you to what's called mudita, which is sympathetic joy. That you're also sensitizing yourself to the joy that other people feel, to take joy at other people's joy, to really resonate with all the good stuff too. It's not just the 10,000 sorrows, it's the 10,000 joys. So we train ourselves to be aware of other people's experience. And the classic story, which you're probably familiar with, which I've shared before, you're walking in a park, you see this cute little puppy, you go over to the puppy, you're about to pet the puppy, and the puppy lunges at you and tries to bite you. You jump back. Suddenly your relationship with the puppy has changed. And then you see that the puppy's leg is caught in a trap. Suddenly your relationship has changed again, and you see that that action was coming out of fear and self-protection. In that same way, when we can recognize how our legs are caught in traps as we act unskillfully, and how others as well, it changes the equation. So about 2 weeks ago, I got a phone call. Have you noticed, is it just me, or have you noticed that you're getting a lot more robocalls on your cell phone? They must have changed some law or something, but I get a lot of, I usually don't pick up unless I know exactly who it is. But on just some occasion, there was an area code where I thought someone would be calling me from. So I picked it up, and I was actually driving, so I didn't really notice that little 2-second pause before it clicks into a human voice. And this is a real aggravation for me. It feels like such an invasion of my privacy, to get these calls. And I realized that part of my aggravation is my family had a really unpleasant experience where, as my mother was moving into dementia, that someone on one of these robocalls kind of scammed my mother into just losing thousands of dollars, and she was tortured about it and confused. It took forever to figure it out. So I have a lot of animosity. And so the phone went through, and this person started talking. I remember her name was Suzanne, and I don't even remember what the pitch was. So I'm in full agitation mode. But there was something about her voice that she sounded like kind of a kind person. And suddenly something switched in me. And so she went into her pitch. I said, "Excuse me, Suzanne, but can you tell me how you got my phone number?" And I didn't say it with any animosity. And she said, I can't tell you, sir. It's all part of an automated system." And I said, "Okay, I understand. Would it be possible to move my number onto a do not call list?" And then she responded, and maybe a little hallucination on my part, but I think she was a little relieved that I wasn't screaming at her. And she said, I can absolutely do that. That is not a problem at all, and I'm really sorry for the intrusion." And I said, and then I could tell she was a good person. And I said, "Well, I appreciate that. It must be really tough to have to do these calls." And she said, "Well, it really can be, but I appreciate you being so kind about this." And I said, "Thank you for your understanding." I said, "And you have a really good phone voice." That was the end of the call. I didn't ask her what she was wearing or anything like that. It's just like... But it was fascinating how I went from rage to compassion. There was just something about, and I don't know, whatever stars were aligned, that I was able to kind of sense her basic goodness that changed the whole tenor of the call and maybe changed her moment too. So again, a little reflection if you like, if you close your eyes. You might bring your attention back to someone you know who's suffering. It might be the same person, it might be someone else. And again, as you reflect on their inner experience, what you imagine they're feeling. And then just to explore this question. Is there a sense of what this person needs? Is there a sense of what they need to feel more whole? And you might imagine, if they had that, what do you imagine that would feel like for them? And then again, you can deepen the breath. And you can let your eyes open. So whenever you're in fear, you shut down. Either you find a default of anger, judgment, blame, or you freeze, or you disassociate in some way. And it's so helpful to remember that behind anyone suffering, there's an unmet need. There's something that's needed. There's something that's wanted that's not happening. And when we can investigate that, turn our attention to that, it can open up new possibilities. And quite often, what we most fundamentally need is to be seen and to be heard. And when we feel seen and heard, there's something that can relax inside a little bit. Again, we talk of the two wings of the practice. One wing is wisdom. It's just seeing clearly what's true. And the second wing is compassion. It's the capacity to be with it, to hold it fully and wholly. So it's about seeing pain, suffering, and feeling it, and sensing the unmet need. So Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about compassion. He talks about the recognition of what he calls interbeing, of how our entire life is all interrelated, interconnected. And he often talks too about how compassion is a verb. That when you feel compassion, it can oftentimes move you toward action. And finding skillful action is very, very important to balance wisdom and compassion as you're relating to others. It's a little Christmas story. What to do with Christopher? Christopher was an awkward and shy child who belonged to the church kids club. It was time to hand out roles for the Christmas play, but what role should the teacher give Christopher? She decided on the innkeeper. It was an important role, but required him only to shake his head and say only one line, "Sorry, we've no room." Christopher grinned from ear to ear when he learned of his important role, and he couldn't wait for the big night. It arrived soon enough, and the play was proceeding according to the plan. Mary and Joseph had traveled to Bethlehem and had come to the door of the inn. Joseph knocked on the door, and it opened to Christopher. "Please, sir, do you have a room we could take?" asked Joseph. Christopher shook his head and replied, "I'm sorry, we've no room." Now, the boy playing Joseph was a particularly confident child. And while the script called for he and Mary to turn away at this point, Joseph decided to exercise some dramatic license. "But sir," he said to the innkeeper, "my wife is about to have her baby and we need somewhere to stay. Couldn't you find us a room?" Christopher's face went white. This was not planned for. And he paused for a moment before repeating his line, "I'm sorry, we've no room." "But sir," replied Joseph, We've traveled such a long way and we've nowhere else to go and my wife is very tired. Surely you can find us something. Christopher bowed his head, shook it sadly, and said, I'm sorry, we've no room. Forlornly, Joseph and Mary started walking away, and Christopher, now fully into his role, felt shamed and saddened. A tear trickled down his cheek. Then his voice was heard calling out, wait, come back, you can have my room. It may not have been according to script, but at that moment, Christopher gave perfect expression to the Christmas story. So when you think of that person or people you reflected on who are suffering right now, when you sense what they're feeling, when you sense their unmet need, then the next question is, what action might you take that would be appropriate? And this is such a critical part of the teaching of wisdom and compassion, is that they have to be balanced. When you think of those four noble truths, that suffering happens to everyone, that there's a cause for suffering, and the cause of suffering has to do with attachment, with clinging, with the inability to let go. The third truth, that you can let go. And the fourth, that there are practices, there's a path that helps you in letting go. Our suffering usually has a lesson. There's something to be learned. I get to see when I'm suffering, where I'm attached, or I'm identified. And seeing that is important. There's a beautiful story of someone who was watching a butterfly begin to emerge from its chrysalis. And as he was watching the butterfly begin to emerge, he thought he would help. And so he chipped away a little bit of the chrysalis, and then he noticed to his horror that the butterfly's wings weren't fully developed, and that butterfly died. And part of what that butterfly requires is to build that resilience, to find its own way. It's only by breaking out of the chrysalis that it fully develops itself at the next stage of its life. So to see someone who's suffering and to intervene before they get the lesson is not empowering to that person. If I want to get good at chess, but if I play with someone who takes it easy on me because they don't want me to get stressed out from losing, I'm never going to get good at chess. But in the same way, if I only play people who are going to trounce me, I'll never get to learn either. So the long and short of it is about, how do you balance compassion and wisdom? What would be most helpful and most skillful when you are with someone who's suffering? If you see a child struggling with homework, is it best to do the homework for them? Better to let them struggle? Or perhaps to really sense what they're needing and to walk them through it skillfully? This is not an easy issue. When someone approaches me on the street wanting money, and I've got a pretty clear sense that money is going to go directly into an addiction, is that helpful? There are those who say, better to give that money to an organization that supports people. And again, it's a judgment call. Sometimes I give the money. So, non-judging awareness makes you more sensitive. It makes you more sensitive to yourself. It makes you more sensitive to those around you. You will become more aware of what you're feeling, of what others are feeling. You become more aware of your own unmet needs and the unmet needs of others. And the challenge is how do you meet that? How do you meet that with compassion and at the same time with wisdom? So I'd like to close with another relatively long story, if you don't mind. So if you like, you can close your eyes. A man tells the story about a special friend he made when he was just a boy. When quite young, Paul's father had one of the first telephones in their neighborhood. Paul was too little to reach the telephone, but used to listen with fascination when his mother talked into it. Then Paul discovered that somewhere inside the wonderful device lived an amazing person. Her name was Information Please, and there was nothing she did not know. Information Please could supply anyone's number in the correct time. Paul's first personal experience with this genie in the bottle came one day while his mother was visiting a neighbor. Amusing himself at the tool bench in the basement, Paul hacked his finger with a hammer. The pain was terrible, but there didn't seem to be any reason in crying because there was no one home to give sympathy. He walked around the house sucking his throbbing finger, finally arriving at the stairway. The telephone. Quickly, Paul ran for the footstool in the parlor and dragged it to the landing. Climbing up, he unhooked the receiver in the parlor and held it to his ear. Information, please, he said into the mouthpiece just above his head. A click or two and a small, clear voice spoke into Paul's ear. Information. I hurt my finger, Paul wailed into the phone. Isn't your mother home? Came the question. Nobody's home but me, Paul blubbered. Are you bleeding? No, I hit my finger with a hammer and it hurts. Can you open your icebox? He said he could. Then chip off a little piece of ice and hold it to your finger. After that, Paul called Information Please for everything. He asked for her help with his geography, and she told me where Philadelphia was. She helped him with his math. She told Paul that his pet chipmunk, which he had caught in the park the day before, would eat fruit and nuts. Then there was a time when Petey, the pet canary, died. Paul called and told her the story. She listened, then said the usual things that grown-ups say to soothe a child, but Paul was inconsolable. He asked her, why is it the birds should sing so beautifully and bring joy to all families, only to end up as a heap of feathers on the bottom of a cage? She must have sensed a deep concern, for she said quietly, Paul, always remember that there are other worlds to sing in. Somehow he felt better. When Paul was 9, his family moved across the country to Boston. Paul missed his friend very much. Information Please belonged in that wooden box back home, but he somehow never thought of trying the tall, shiny new phone that sat on the table in the hall. And as he grew into his teens, the memories of those childhood conversations never really left him. Often in moments of doubt and perplexity, Paul would recall the serene sense of security he had then. He appreciated how patient, understanding, and how kind she was to have spent time with a little boy. And a few years later, on his way west to college, Paul's plane put down in Seattle. He had about a half an hour or so between planes. He spent 15 minutes on the phone with his sister who lived there now. Then, without thinking what he was doing, Paul dialed his hometown operator and said, Information, please. Miraculously, he heard the small, clear voice he knew so well. Information. He hadn't planned this, but he heard himself saying, could you please tell me how to spell fix? There was a long pause. Then came the soft-spoken answer, I guess your finger must have healed by now. Paul laughed. So it's really still you. I wonder if you have any idea how much you meant to me during that time. I wonder, she said, if you know how much your calls meant to me. I never had any children. I used to look forward to your calls. Paul told her how he'd often thought of her over the years and asked if he could call her again when he came back to visit his sister. Please do, she said. Just ask for Sally. 3 months later, Paul was back in Seattle. A different voice answered, information. He asked for Sally. Are you a friend? Yes, a very old friend. I'm sorry to have to tell you this. Sally had been working part-time the last few years because she was sick, and she died 5 weeks ago. Before he could hang up, she said, wait a minute. Is this Paul? Yes. Well, Sally left a message for you. She wrote it down in case you called. Let me read it to you. The note said, tell him I still say there are other worlds to sing in. He'll know what I mean. Let's take a few minutes. You can close your eyes. In the Buddhist tradition, compassion is described as an immeasurable state. There's no limit, no edge to compassion. In these final moments, as you feel the breath, imagine you could breathe in compassion for yourself. And as you breathe out, you might wish well-being to all. And as you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Thank you. May you have more ease and fun over the holidays than you can imagine. This is our last gathering for this year. We have no class next week due to Christmas, and the following is New Year's Day. So I look forward to seeing you in 2017. Again, if you'd like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back. Thank you as always for your generous support for the class and for the church and for IMCW. And we have cookies. Take care.